Welcome to Live Well, Dream Big. I'm Suzanne Monroe, founder of the International Association of Wellness Professionals, where I've been teaching people how to live a life of wellness, tap into their passion, and go for their dreams for over 15 years. I believe living well and dreaming big starts with ourselves. This podcast will show you how to create a healthy, holistic life, empower your mindset, follow your dreams, and make a big impact. Let's dive in right now. Hello, Live Well, Dream Big community. Very excited to be back with you today for another episode. And I'm especially excited because today I'm talking with a special guest about the healing power of plants and nature. Dr. Nicole Apelian is joining me. She's an herbalist, a biologist, an author, an anthropologist, a wilderness skills instructor, and a mother. And she was a challenger on the 2nd and 5th seasons of the History Channel's TV series Alone, which I was binge watching last night. And this is where she was thriving in the wilderness, totally solo with little more than a knife and her wits. She was also recently on the UK channel for documentary series Surviving the Stone Age, now available on Amazon Prime and Discovery. And she's the author of 3 books: The Lost Book of Herbal Remedies, The Healing Power of Plant Medicine, A Reference Guide to Surviving Nature, Outdoor Preparation and Remedies, and The Forager's Guide to Wild Foods, Edible Plants, Lichens, Mushrooms, and Seaweeds. And you know what? There's a lot more to her bio and her story because Nicole has a very compelling story where she was bedridden with an incurable illness and is now surviving and thriving today. But I'm going to let her tell us a little bit about that. And that's what we're going to start out talking about. But welcome, Nicole.
Hi, good morning, everybody. It's so nice to be here. And I usually like to start with a gratitude. And I'm just really grateful, yes, to be right here. And also I'm looking out my windows. I'm in my office and I can sort of see all the birds flying. We had amazing grosbeaks, black-headed grosbeaks to our feeder this morning, which was really fun. We had parents and fledglings, and so I'm just really grateful for the birds today. So
I love it. I know you're so connected to nature and animals too. I love that you're it's just such a big part of your life, and I know we're going to talk a little bit more about how that all came to be. And there's so many stories we can dive into, but let's kind of just start out with, I guess, the big story, on my mind, is just how you, and everyone has probably asked you about this, but you were diagnosed with an incurable illness. And what was that all about? What happened?
Right. Wow. Yeah. And it's been 22 years now, but 22 years ago, I was 30 and I lost the eyesight in my left eye really suddenly. And I was having sort of other issues that I couldn't quite place, losing my balance, extreme fatigue, a lot of pain that was coming from nowhere. And, at the prime of your life, you don't really think anything's wrong, right? Yeah. But it turns out, after my eyesight went, that was a big trigger. And so I went in to get it diagnosed and looked at. Anyway, it turns out I have very classic brain lesions and the MRI, and I got diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. Now, at that time, this is back in early 2000, really not much was known about autoimmune illnesses. And no one ever asked about things like diet and lifestyle and, what supplement level, what are your supplement levels and things along those lines. And so really at the time I was young and I followed my doctor's orders. I was really scared. I went to the neurologist and got this incredible diagnosis, and I went downhill really, really quickly. I all of a sudden, within a few months, I was missing most of work. I was doubled over in pain. All of a sudden, I was using a cane. And over the next couple of years, that progressed. Actually, the next really 6 months, it progressed to the point I was often bedbound, using a cane when I could get out of bed, and on good days, a wheelchair at night. So, and those were days I thought I could get out of bed. And so I was taking all these Western medications and drugs to counteract drugs and daily injections, which told myself also mentally every day that I was sick. And that lasted for a couple of years until really I was at the point where my life really I wasn't living. I was struggling every day. I had incredible, brain fatigue and brain fog. It was affecting my cognitive abilities. And of course, my physical abilities were completely limited. And finally, I decided that I had to make a change. I wanted to have another son. Ended up having 2 more, but I wanted to at the time, and I wanted to, be living my life fully. And the life I was living and the track that I was on the prognosis was extremely bad and I didn't really have any hope left. So I decided to change my lifestyle around. And I'm a scientist. So for me, peer-reviewed scientific research is my go-to. I like to go do deep dives. And so I started deep diving into both the medications I was on, which I found it didn't actually have very good efficacy. And for most people didn't work at all. And also into natural medicine, which already was a background of mine. But, at that age and when you get so scared, doctor's orders are something that you automatically follow. And at that time, alternative medicine was still alternative. It wasn't more mainstream as it is now. And so I decided to get well, and I did. I started with my diet, and I eat a completely anti-inflammatory diet. And gluten, I did a food sensitivity test, and I don't eat gluten anymore. I can do dairy, but I try to eat anti-inflammatory foods, which basically means low processed foods, very little sugar. And I always like to tell people when they think, how do you eat like that? I say 80-20, 80% of the time, do what you can, and 20% you're okay. And I find when I tell people that, they tend to do 95-5, which is about what I do. So you can't say 100% because no one can stick to that, right? Then they eat a cookie and they eat the whole box. So anyway, that was the first step. And then bringing in things like yoga and gratitudes, which is huge because I think the power of the mind is often underestimated. When people get told they're sick, they get sicker. And that's not hypochondria. It's actually a physical reaction to our our mental state. So, and nowadays, of course, there's lots of studies out about that. But at the time, that was not considered, that was not even something that was in the mainstream. So, doing daily gratitudes like the one we started with is very important to me because giving thanks for something external does cause an internal shift. And when you're not thinking of yourself as sick every day, or you're giving thanks, even if you're having a crappy day for something else, it really does make a big difference in your mental state. So those were the first sort of forays in. And then I was able to add in supplements, medicinal mushrooms, which we can talk about, in this podcast today. And I can talk about which ones I use and why. And I was able to make a real shift to the point that, I have had no new lesions. It's, 20 years later, and I'm healthy and thriving and happy, and really am able to live my life to the fullest. And actually, I'm now healthier because I got diagnosed with MS and I had to change my lifestyle. Right. I am actually now going to live longer. I live a healthier life, and I am, I think, stronger than I ever was in the past, both physically, and mentally. And I got to prove that on, alone when I was out for 2 months and thriving in the wilderness and just loving every minute of it. So I am able to live my life fully and now thrive. So that's a little bit about my story. Yeah. But basically, I had to take charge of my own health because no one else was going to do it for me, nor were physicians at that time asking the right questions.
Yep. I do wonder now today, it's, 20 some years later, like how far do you think we've come in this journey? Like if someone were to walk in and get some, similar diagnosis or something else, are we hearing a shift in like all the different things that, that you've incorporated to get you to where you are today? Or what are your thoughts on that?
I don't think we've shifted as much as we should. I feel that the reliance is if you go on, to a classic neurologist, you're still going to get the options of injections and medications, things that actually, and I'm not anti-Western medicine. I mean, if you need something, you should use it, right? But what I am really pro is using other things first, right? Change your diet, change your lifestyle, add in herbal medicine, add in supplements, those sorts of things can make such a big difference that you might not need to go on Western medication. So it's not that I'm anti that, it's just that I'm pro doing everything else first. Right. So, if I break my arm, I'm going to go get it set. Right. I don't usually do that myself unless I'm in the woods and I have to. Right. So
the thing is, you probably could do it. That's what's so amazing. I'd be like,
yeah. But I feel that we haven't come as far as we should have. I think physicians now, we are getting now more functional physicians, right? Holistic practitioners, functional oncologists who integrate herbal medicine along with Western medication, which actually, they work very well together in a lot of cases with turkey tail and reishi and lion's mane mushrooms, along with, cancer treatment. So they can be paired very well. But I think that it's shifting, but it hasn't shifted enough. I think, for example, when people will go in with, chronic Lyme or autoimmune issues as examples, the first go-to is really medication versus lifestyle and what you're putting in your body. And, as far as I'm concerned, and people that have followed my protocol, the messages I get and the feedback I get is they're well. So, right. So it works, and nowadays there is science finally that backs up diet and the influence of that it has direct influence on autoimmune illnesses. The medicinal mushrooms that I take, vitamin D levels, omega-3s, B12, all of those sorts of things that are not that hard to implement into your daily life and really can get you well again. And who doesn't want to be healthy and well? So I feel like there should be more of that, because those should be what you go to first. And the other things, therefore, should follow, because treating symptoms doesn't actually get to the root cause of the problem, right?
Well, that reminds me of something. I actually, I have one of your books here, the Lost Book of Herbal Remedies. And I had marked a page in here because you said something that kind of ties into what you're saying now that it really struck me. It was like, most of what we call medicine today are artificial creations that have just been slightly chemically altered from nature, so that these natural herbal medicines you can't patent what's in nature, right? So you have to chemically alter it. And it was like, oh, wow. Like, to think of it that right. Like, think of it that way. It kind of brings you back. It kind of makes you like, realize, this is really what's a part of it, So on one level, like herbal medicine and plant medicine has been lost, but do you see a future where like we're going to go back to those times where it was the primary thing, or maybe we have like an equal playing field, or are we getting there, or do we still have like a long way to go?
I think we've got a long way to go, but I think it's shifting. Nowadays, people who wouldn't normally have considered herbal medicine are using it and considering it. For me, one thing that was really positive about going on alone was that it gave me a platform to be able to show people that, wild foods, wild medicine, that sort of stuff, it works, right? Something simple, like on the Alone show on day 43, I think it was, I actually cut my knuckle off. They didn't show it very much, but completely down to the bone on this finger. And you can tell, but you can barely tell, like no one would know. But completely off. And luckily I had collected yarrow, which is a type of flowering plant that grows pretty much everywhere. I'm sure all of you have yarrow in your area. You might not know what it is, but it's there. And, had yarrow that I'd collected earlier to stop the bleeding, which it's a coagulant, so it stopped it immediately. And it's an antibacterial. And then I had usnea, this witch's hair lichen that I'd collected. So I was actually able, luckily for me, the next 48 hours, I couldn't leave my shelter because there were trees falling and it was a huge storm. So I just sat in my shelter for 2 days and had this yarrow and usnea tea that I'd made, very strong decoction. I just put my finger in it and it completely healed. I didn't get an infection, even a minor one, never mind a systemic infection, which would have pulled me from the show and from my experience there. But I was able to treat it really easily, right? So it's an incredible, there's so much diversity and possibility with what grows just right outside your backyard. And that's really kind of my mission, is just to let people know that we do have options, right? You don't have to go and, necessarily always go big pharma the first route, right? There are options that you can take. And I think that, for example, like I was saying, that Alone was a great platform because it did reach people some of whom may already have been interested in this sort of thing, but it also reached a lot of people who might never have heard of it. And that was really fantastic for me because all of a sudden it's, reaching a mainstream audience and teaching them about, wild medicine, which is free, right? I mean, you don't have to make it yourself. I have an apothecary. People can purchase it if they don't want to. Some things are trickier than others, but you can make things yourself. You can use things out in your own backyard. And, in our family, that's our go-to. Our go-to is always herbal medicine because it works.
Yeah.
I'd love for people to be able to just learn more about wild foods and wild plants. Yeah.
Well, you inspired me because I've been doing organic gardening for like 10 years, but it's always like, things I'm going to cook with. I'm big into cooking and, all your herbs that you're going to use for that and your vegetables and everything. I got your medicinal garden kit though. I just planned, I'm like, you know what? I'm not planting the whole thing. Okay. I'm going to just pick 5 and yarrow is one of them, but I planted them. I can see little sprouts coming up now, not ready yet, but I'm wondering to myself, am I going to just be looking at those saying, wow, those look really beautiful? Or am I going to go to the next step, follow your advice and be like, okay, you can actually use this, so how hard is it for me or really anybody else listening? You plant it, you grow it. And then, the next stage is like, you've got to incorporate it, whether you're doing teas or tinctures or salves or things like that. Is that a big learning curve? Do you think that's realistic for, the everyday person out there? Or?
That's a great question. And actually, no one's really asked quite like that before. Really excellent question. So I think what I always say to people is start with one plant, right? Because plants are overwhelming. Like, you look at animals, there's only so many mammals, there's only so many birds, there's a lot of birds, but plants, the diversity. And then you add in, lichens and mushrooms and seaweeds, and it's incredible the amount of species that are out there, right? So it can very quickly get overwhelming for people. So let's use yarrow as a great example, because you're growing it in your medicinal garden kit, and it grows really easily. It's a beautiful plant for your garden. So there's that, right? But it's very simple to be able to take some of that, harvest the yarrow leaves and flowers, and, dry them. Basically, you don't need anything fancy. You don't need a hydrator. You can just put them on a tray or in a basket and let them naturally dry. And then keep them in a glass jar, for example. So if you do have a cut or a wound, you can take that yarrow and put it right on. It'll stop the bleeding immediately. Or if you're in your garden and you get stung and you know what the plantain plant is, right? Not the banana, but the one that grows as a weed in many gardens. Chew that up, put it on your stinger bite, and it makes it go away immediately. And so once you sort of just use them on the fly out of your garden, then you can that's like the first step. And maybe just learn those two, learn plantain and yarrow. Very easy plants to identify, very easy plants to find. We all have them, I'm sure, growing in our yards. Even if we maybe haven't planted them, maybe not yarrow, but you've got it in your garden kit. So that's a great one to have. And then, even my kids, when they get stung or get a bee, something by a bee or even by a mosquito, they just chew that up, put it on, and it goes away. So teaching those things to children, I think, is especially important, because then it's they get integrated into it and they just know it growing up, right? Yeah. But for those people who are adults, start with those two plants, learn about them, incorporate them as a tea. Plantain's great for gut issues. You could eat it. It's edible. Yarrow's a little bitter. I don't love it as a tea. I always put something else in it to sweeten it up a little, like bee balm or something. But you can make a salve or an oil. You can make a tincture. The instructions are in that book, and very, very simple. It's not hard to do. And then you can have it for yarrow brings down a fever. It's a great antibacterial for all sorts of things. It calms the central nervous system. It has so many uses. So I think doing it a plant at a time is really the way to go. And if you even did a plant a week, that's 52 plants. If that's overwhelming, a plant a month, 12 plants is going to get you pretty far. And you're going to be able to learn some pretty incredible things from just those 12 plants. So
I love that idea. A plant a month or something like that, right? Because then it's like this learning experience. You're kind of like connecting to that one plant, and exactly. Which kind of makes me wonder about you. Like, have you always been this connected to plants? I mean, you obviously became an herbalist, but like, did you just were you a kid and you just loved nature and plants, or did this develop over time? Or I was
a total feral child. Yes. I mean, I grew up in a medium-sized city. So I grew up, but I was really lucky. My stepdad was also who raised me, was very into the outdoors. And so obviously, like, my parents would never let us inside. I know kids are inside so much nowadays, but we were never inside, right? We were always out, even though it was a city, running through backyards and going to the park and visiting with our neighbors and riding our bikes everywhere. And, we didn't have TV. We had one black and white small one my parents kept in the closet, but we weren't allowed to watch it. Of course, there was no internet there then, right? We didn't have cell phones, obviously. We didn't have any of that. So there were no distractions like that. And so we were always just outside, and I loved being outside. I had a bug collection and a shell collection and, everything, a bird nest collection, anything to do with the outdoors and travel I was really into. Luckily for me, my stepdad really fostered that. So we would always go canoeing and camping and hiking and bring our field guides and go bird watching and fishing. So that was just lucky that I had someone that helped me sort of foster my passions of what I was doing. But I was outside, regardless. But then I decided to go into science and into biology originally, just because it's something that I enjoyed and was passionate about. And through travel and through spending time, and I moved to Africa in the mid-90s after my first graduate degree to join the Peace Corps. And that really instilled sort of knowledge of living in place. And post-Peace Corps, I did lion research over there in the middle of nowhere. So you really have to be on your game there. You have to know what the birds are saying. Because they tell you where the predators are or where the snake is. You have to know about tracking. You have to have your sixth sense and intuition intact. You have to learn about animal communication. All of those sorts of things get integrated. And then, once you have sort of those skills sort of integrated, that nature connection really in your system, adding things like learning about the plants. It's a natural progression that happened after that. And learning, of course, wilderness living skills and survival skills. So it really was a progression, but I've always held that interest. And then when I get really interested into something, I just deep dive into it. So yes.
You're like tunnel vision.
Yeah.
I love it. Okay, so many questions just came out of that, but one of them I want to ask you is, so fast forward now, years later, you have your own kids, right? But the world has really changed, right? I mean, in terms of social media, cell phones, technology. Are you raising your children the same way your father did? Or are you trying to, kind of balance both worlds, or just tell us a little bit about that?
I think you have to balance both worlds nowadays. I don't think there's any way around it. So, I mean, my kids are all older. Everyone's, they're teenagers and on and above. And so, when they were younger, of course, limiting things, being smart about it. But my kids grew up going to like skills gatherings with me, camping with me. Skills gatherings are traditional skills gatherings it's like the best summer camp for adults and children. It's all ages like 1 to 80. And my kids, since they were little, have gone camping with me, have gone fishing with me. I have boys, and I was the one who always took them on all those sorts of crazy adventures, And so they've really been lucky in that they've grown up with mentors also that aren't me, right? That's so important for kids to have mentors that are not their parents, because often, even if their parents know what they want to learn, they don't necessarily want to learn it from their parents, right? They'll pick up things through your behavior and by listening to you, but you teaching them directly is often not the best. If all you moms and dads probably know that, right? Your kids don't often want to learn things from you. They want to learn things from people they really connect with. It's not that I don't connect with my children, because I actually I'm really lucky. I have such a great relationship with my kids. But they often want to learn from other mentors. And those skills gatherings really gave us this opportunity to kind of live in intergenerational communities like we did when we were, hunter-gatherer societies, right? Or some other countries where how people still live, where they have aunties and uncles to go from and learn from. So they had that opportunity to, they think that, learning how to bark tan a deer hide is normal. How to weave a basket, how to, tracking skills, basic herbal medicine, all of these things that people might consider a little different for them. They think that's pretty normal behavior and normal things for everybody to know. They had knives at a very young age. Obviously, they were taught knife safety, right? But I think we tend to underestimate our children and what the opportunities are and what their abilities are by helicoptering them a little bit too much, right? And I love the fact that I was able to give my kids so much freedom at those gatherings, for example, and be able to trust them so they could learn all of these things and put it into practice. So I feel really confident. They're both super skilled. One of them actually teaches skills. He loves it. And it's been instilled in them since they were very young. So I think instilling that kind of stuff, kids have a natural love of the outdoors. Like, it's not like most kids don't like the outdoors. There are some exceptions, but most people love being outside, especially when they're little. So if you're able to foster that when they're children, it makes everything else flow so much more easily. Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see what their paths and journeys become and what they end up doing with their lives too.
Yeah, exactly. I had a great tale once. I spent a lot of time with the Kalahari Bushmen. And we had a number of ones asking, someone had asked one of the men, they said, basically, what's your job as parents? And they said, our only job is to love them, not discipline them, not teach them, because they live in these intergenerational communities. So other people, they'll discipline and love, and they'll discipline and teach other people's children, right? Their grandkids, their nieces, nephews, their cousins, et cetera, but not their own kids. Wow. But their only job is to love their children. I thought, oh my God, wouldn't that be like, as a mom, I thought, wouldn't that be amazing if that was your only job? Just love them, nothing else. You don't have to worry about the rest. other people have that covered, but you teach and foster other kids. So I always thought that was just very beautiful and try to instill that the best I can, and as best we can do in our modern lifestyle, right? It's all a balance.
I love that. It reminds me of a book that we have here at home. It's like the gardener versus the carpenter, like in terms of parenting, right? Like we all want to carpenter our kids and like mold them into this perfect thing. And like, you just let your garden be wild and grow, and like it's going to get to where it wants to go. Yet it's very hard to do sometimes in everyday life.
It is, as long as you foster sort of curiosity and love of learning and asking questions and kids having downtime, right? That's another thing. My youngest child said to me recently, Mom, I was just reading about how important being bored is. I'm like, I know, it fosters creativity and imagination. And so now he spends time just like sitting.
Okay.
I'm like, that's great. Good.
Okay. That's awesome. Maybe my son will get there at some point. That's awesome though. You mentioned let's go back to the Sand Bushmen and the Kalahari Desert. I mean, you decided to go and basically, again, live with the indigenous people who you mentioned are still hunters and gatherers. I mean, why did you do that, first of all, but also like, what's a big gem that we can take away from that experience?
Well, I feel really lucky. So I've been working in Botswana, excuse me, since 1995. So once when I first joined the Peace Corps, and just loved living there so much that post Peace Corps, I stayed on and did, as I was saying, carnivore research, and then started a safari company so I could get back there all the time, and now have a nonprofit that I run with a community of Kalahari San Bushmen who live in the Western Kalahari. And we are, working on I'm working on actually a book with them about. They asked myself and another woman to document their plant uses. We've been working on it for 12 years. It's a long book, but there's a lot of translation and things like that. And so much more information keeps coming our way. Traditional, medicinal, and edible uses of Kalahari plants, but also looking at ways to, basically they've lost their land. And so looking at, it's really hard to keep your community and your ways intact when you don't have land. So we've been working on that as another project. But I barely felt like it's been such a gift that I've been incorporated into. They're my second family, right? To be incorporated into this family, be able to, go out with them on the land, learn about not just sort of their skills of like how do they make fire and how they track and how they hunt, and which is super interesting, and how they dig for roots and how they sustainably kind of farm the Kalahari in a way. But also the more important things are, how do they raise their children? How do they keep their culture intact? What sort of things, systems do they have in place for conflict? Why is the trance dance so important? It's a drug-free dance. People get into a trance through music and clapping, and it's a way of coming around and gathering and healing, both mentally and physically, each other. So all of those sort of pieces have been so useful to me in my daily life. Every time I go back, we always say it's like our Bushman tune-up. It's like it reminds you of what's important and how to live in the present moment. I think that's one of the biggest things, because looking at the individuals in that community, people are happy and have joy, daily joy in their lives, and they're connected. They're connected to each other, they're connected to themselves, and they're connected to nature, which are the three sort of pillars of a healthy culture. And if you have all three of those, you generally are a happy, healthy individual. And so, because all of those have different pieces that are incorporated with them. And so I'm trying to figure out strategies of how to bring that back to my family and my greater community and to everybody, right? So a lot of what I write about in my blog is, yes, I write a lot about herbal medicine and wild plants and wild foods, but also connection and how to foster that. And so how you can have more daily joy in your life, how you can have less stress and anxiety in your life, which is so important, because I think especially during COVID, people got so isolated and they really had to look inside themselves and realize what's important. And it was a kind of a scary time, I think, for a lot of people, and a really difficult time for a lot of people as well. But a lot of the lessons that I learned from them allowed me to sort of move through it pretty easily. And so there's a lot of gems in there, part of, that how you raise your children, about how you interact, and really how you live in the present moment. That old sort of mantra of chop wood, carry water really holds true. And I think that's part of when I was on alone, why I was so happy, is that was finding joy in living in that present moment when all you're thinking about is, do you have enough firewood to stay warm? Do you have a fire? Do you have clean water? Do you have, a warm enough shelter? Like those basic things of living keeps your mind in the now. And really that's all we have, right? Is the present moment. Worrying about the future, planning for it's different, but worrying about it is not so helpful. Dwelling on the past is not useful, and being bitter about it. Learning from it is, right? So it's just different perspectives and how to sort of put those together and be grateful for our everyday lives and what we do have.
I love that. I love that so much. And that was one thing that actually struck me when I was watching your season of Alone about you. I was like, she just seems so joyful. Like I'm picturing myself. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, the producers thought I didn't film some. I'm like, no, I filmed everything. I was just happy. It was kind of awesome out there.
Yeah, they're looking for those moments where you're like totally struggling. And I'm like, Nicole's like, this is great. No, I haven't caught the whole thing, but I mean, really, it really did stick out to me. You had this just joy that kind of like came through, the camera. It was amazing. And I was going to ask you about that, but it sounds like you're saying it's because you were in the present, but there was this connection to nature as well that was a part of it. But
right. I never felt lonely. Yeah.
You didn't feel lonely even though you were completely alone.
Right. Because I wasn't really completely alone. Right. There was there was wildlife around me. There was, I knew the mink who, finally after a month got used to me and would come and eat its meal next to me. For the first month it ran, and then it finally realized I wasn't a threat. I had the bears that I could sit and watch and enjoy their company. I had the pair of kingfishers and the pair of stellar jays and the eagle that always would come and swoop to this certain place. So you can feel connection. And also when you're in a place like that, you're in your gut and your intuition is so open, your primal brain's open, you can feel everything. So I could feel my kids, which is why I actually had to go home, is because I felt one of my kids call me home, clear as if he'd picked up a phone and called me. So, and actually, there's actually a book that I have a chapter in coming out this fall by Amber Tamblyn. She's a director, actor. She's really quite incredible and an amazing author on intuition. And I have a chapter in that book on the power of intuition and and the science behind it, because it is actually there's proof scientifically, and how to foster intuition in yourself. So it's pretty fascinating. But I definitely didn't feel alone because I knew that I had all that around me. And I also knew I was going home, right? It wasn't like I was in a situation where I was never going to see my family again. I missed my kids, but I wasn't going to go home because of them, because I felt them and I knew that they were there. But now when one needed me, different story, right? That's when I made the decision to, next day pack up and go, because I had to get home to him. But yeah.
Wow. So you've had these experiences, right? You've been with the indigenous cultures. You were in Alone. You're out in nature a lot. You're talking about being in the present moment, right? And yet in the society we've built up, and especially here in Western culture, we've just built up so many things that fill our days, and people are so busy, and yet they're not going to go live off the grid. But what do you see in terms of people like getting to that place of cultivating that joy? Is it about kind of like cleaning out your life and downsizing so that you can simplify? Or can you live in the world that we're in today, but still experience that joy by just coming into the present? Like, what are your thoughts?
I think you have to phrase it. And I mean, not everyone's going to move to the woods, right? I mean, I live in a house, but it's in the woods in the middle of nowhere. Not everybody can do that, right? I'm not like the suggestion that everybody should do that just doesn't make sense for people, because there's millions and millions of people living in cities who need to find that connection, right? Who need to find daily joy. So I always like to recommend something really tangible. Like I like tangible things, right? Things that people can actually do. And I always recommend a sit spot. It's a place you go every day, no phone, right? You don't bring your media with you. You're not there. It's just somewhere you go every day. It can be your back deck. If you live in a high rise, it could be your porch. Stick a bird feeder out there and maybe some herbs, right? A bird feeder will bring wildlife in, even if you live in the city. Or if you can get to a park easily, as long as you can go every day, right? It has to be accessible. And mine is just on my front porch or my back deck. And I go every day and I sit for a certain amount of time, and the wildlife around gets to know you, so they don't startle when you're there. You see the changes in seasons. You notice the buds changing. You notice more of what's around you. But you also get this calming feeling because you're out in nature without an agenda, right? There's nothing I need to do in that time. So it's meditative. I'm not the best on meditation. Like some people can do and can do meditation. Like for me, It's not my thing. Like I think it's great for people that can do it. My meditation is things like gardening, doing my sit spot, giving gratitudes, right? When I do yoga, for example, at home. But I can't, I'm just not a person who can do the sort of classic type of meditation, and kudos to those who do, because it's wonderful. But we don't, what I'm saying is we don't all have to do the same thing, right? You have to do it fits our own lifestyle. So if you can find, a spot, and I have a friend in New York City who her sit spot was in a park just a block from her house. And she would tell me stories about she told me a story about this Cooper's hawk that she kept noticing. And she had this amazing conversation with this homeless man in the park who also noticed the Cooper's hawk, and because that's his sit spot, right? He lives there. So he's there every day. So they had this wonderful moment of connection around this hawk and that they had both noticed over time because they both were regularly there. And so that sort of connection just brought her such joy to be able to have that experience while living in the city. So there are definite opportunities for living in the present. And you're right, simplifying things does help. We all have learning to say no, right? It's a lot of us have busy schedules. And, for me, I don't work weekends, I don't work nights. And, I really try to take off and have a good vacation. And, someday when it's nice out, I'm out in my garden. So I have to, learn how to balance. I'm writing another book right now. I run an apothecary. I have kids. I have a lot of, things like this going on. And so it's finding that balance of what matters and where you want to put your efforts in. So I find that, I have this plate. And as all happens to all of us, even me, that plate gets unbalanced sometimes, right? Like sometimes there's too much on my plate. And so I have to figure, all right, what can I remove from the plate to realistically live the lifestyle I want to live? Because ultimately it's my choice. And if that means saying no to things that maybe I think are good opportunities, or I feel bad of saying no because I just, things are time consuming. Sometimes I just have to say no and really respect my own boundaries in order to be healthy and happy and be there for my family and friends. So that's a really hard lesson to learn. It took me a long time to figure that out, but reevaluating every about 3 months really helps for me of where I'm going to put my energy.
I love it. You've got to do the self-care. It's actually it's so important for the self, but we think, selfish, when we think of taking care of ourselves, but
right. It's so well put. Self-care is not selfish. Because you're more present for your family and the people who, whom you love and who are around you. If you do self-care, you're actually then less selfish because you're able to be more accessible for those who actually do need you.
Right. Because you want to show up, you want to make an impact, or you want to be a giver, you want to be a helper, right? But you really can't do that unless you can do it better if you're caring for yourself, which I think you're such a beautiful model of. I mean, we've talked about so many things. Let's talk about the apothecary now too, because that's a whole nother thing that you're involved in and that you do. I do want to touch on that. How did you decide to start that? And maybe tell us like a couple favorite things over there in the apothecary.
You bet. So, the apothecary just started for me. So I was making my own herbal medicine for my own healing. So that's how, it didn't start. I'm a scientist, right? I never started to set out to have a business. It was never in my agenda of things I wanted to do. I didn't have business training, I have scientific training across the board. So I started making medicine for me. And then I started making medicine for my family, tinctures and salves. Tinctures, for those who don't know, are a liquid, just a liquid form of medicine that you take orally. And it gets into your bloodstream really, really quickly. For those on the podcast, I just demonstrated that's what it was. Those who are listening and not watching. And it gets into your bloodstream immediately. So it doesn't have to go through your digestive tract, especially people like with autoimmune issues. And a lot of people who eat Western diets have leaky gut. So they have a lot of issues with digestion. So tinctures get into your bloodstream within like 4 minutes. And so that medicine is really accessible for you. So making tinctures and salves, which are just basically external herbal balms to put on wounds or rashes or whatever the issue is, or joint pain and things like that. So more and more people started wanting these things. So I started making more for friends and family. And then I started selling them at gatherings that I would teach at. And the popularity just grew. And then I was making them for other people with autoimmune issues. And then all of a sudden it bloomed into this very small business. And when a loan hit, I got tens of thousands of messages of people like, what do you do for MS? What do you do for autoimmune issues? So actually on my website, NicoleApelian.com, I have a really great blog of what I do every day for MS, and it applies for most autoimmune illnesses. And my new book that's going to come out later this year is on natural protocols for like 50 different ailments. And with the scientific research that backs it. That's so important to me, right? It's not mumbo jumbo, herbal mumbo jumbo. This is stuff that has research that's backed up by science. And so as that grew, all of a sudden I had this blossoming business, and I actually at one point had to make a decision. Do I go forth with it as a business and really make it work, or, do I not? I had to make that thing. And I decided at that point there were enough people who were using my herbal medicine as their monthly medicine that I really felt compelled to continue, because I also know that the stuff that I make, it's extracted correctly. There's certain methods for mushrooms, especially, that you need to extract things in 2 different ways to get the full spectrum medicinal components. And there are people relying on it at that point for autoimmune issues. So I decided to keep it as a distinct business and put my energy there, which has been really good, because the feedback that I get from people who use the herbal, my tinctures and salves is incredible. And the wellness that it's provided for people has been outstanding. So, for me, if I use kind of, I have everything in my apothecary I use, and a lot is for prevention, for viruses and things like that. Because when you have an autoimmune issue, you don't want to get sick. So I like to do things as a preventative. And so I don't. And then the medicinal mushrooms, I take lion's mane mushroom, reishi mushroom, cordyceps mushroom, and turkey tail mushroom every day. They're immunomodulators, which is really good for people with autoimmune issues. I double extract them, and I do a couple other things so that they have the full spectrum of medicinal components. Because you always hear people drinking reishi tea, which is great because you miss all of the triterpenoids, which are really important, that deinodermic acids and things like that. You don't get any of that from reishi tea. You're missing half the components. So I would say, why would you drink the reishi and drink it as a tea when you can actually get the full spectrum and use a tincture that's double extracted? So, and I use things like lion's mane for cognition. It helps increase nerve growth factor. They're all anti-inflammatory. And for autoimmune, stopping inflammation is really number one. So, I could go on and on about all 4 of those mushrooms and what they do, but they're incredible. And really those four mushrooms, they made such a difference for me. And I'm not the only one in my family that takes them, even though the rest of my family doesn't have autoimmune issues, right?
Well, that's what I was going to ask you next.
On a daily basis. Yeah.
So it's not just you developed this because of your story and your journey. You've helped so many others who have the autoimmune conditions, but you're saying anybody should or could be taking these for just general health, even if you don't have an issue.
Exactly. I mean, reishi is known as the mushroom of immortality. It's an adaptogen, so it's good for stress, high cortisol, inflammation, hormonal imbalances, low energy, brain fog, things that a lot of people have issues with. Turkey tail is so good for your gut. They're all anti-cancer and antiviral, which is like kind of just a nice bonus, especially nowadays, right? But turkey tail is great it's so well known for cancer, but it also helps with candida overgrowth and small bacterial overgrowth and elevated blood pressure and blood sugar management and so many different things. But it's also an immune modulator, which is great, but it's really good antiviral. Cordyceps is good for fatigue. It's good for boosting energy. It's good for the brain, especially, lion's mane and cordyceps are really good for anyone that has issues with brain function, dementia that runs in the family. Lemon balm is really good for that as well. So there's so many, everything is, of course, if you go in the apothecary, there's a search function and people can find what they need. But, and on my blog as well, I have a newsletter people can sign up for on my website. And I, just love sending information just twice a week out about wild foods and wild medicines, because the apothecary is all about wild medicine, but I also incorporate a lot of wild foods into my daily diet, because we can really absorb those nutrients and they're so healthy and so good for our gut. And a lot of mental disorders, I'm going to say mental issues, including anxiety and stress and depression, and physical things are related to our gut. They're finding more and more. So really I have a balanced gut tincture that people just have had amazing success with, because getting your gut balanced and adding in, probiotics and things like that, and adding in wild foods really gets your gut healthy. And that's a really great way to stay healthy regardless, because you want to stop things even before they start, right? So it's across the board health.
So many things there that you just said, but I just want to say, right? In the time that we have, this has just been an amazing conversation talking with you today. I know I've learned so much. And I want to say for everyone tuning in, we're going to put the show notes in the show notes. We're going to put the links to Nicole's Apothecary and her books and the other things that she's mentioned. So you're all like, oh, I got to write this down or whatever. Yeah, it's all going to be there for you. It's all going to be there. Let's just switch gears now a minute, Nicole. I want to go to our live audience that's joining us for the final minutes of our time together. And I don't want to hog all the question time, though I could. And let's just pop over to everybody and see what questions you guys might have for Nicole. Let's pop over to
her smiling
Kim.
face.
Hey, Kim, how are you?
Good. How are you doing today?
Great. Good to see you out there.
So my big question is, as a wellness coach, how have you seen wellness coaches integrate plant medicine and wild foods into their practice?
Oh, great question. So as a wellness coach, figuring out, first of all, you have there's a lot of sort of naturopathic training, I think, that dovetails with wellness coaching and herbal medicine. I think that there's a sort of confluence, and I used to do one-on-one wellness coaching, and I think I don't have time for it now. It's such a great. I'm so glad that there are so many people doing it. So integrating herbal medicine, it's so important. So figuring out, first of all, what is going on with your patient, and whether it's anxiety, stress, sleep, rheumatoid arthritis, whatever is Lyme, whatever is going on with whomever it is you're talking to. So looking for really good resources that, do integrate things like diet, mindfulness practices like gratitude, nature connection, things like, herbal medicine, as we've talked about, wild foods. I'm coming out with a book later this year that I think is going to be a really good reference guide for naturopaths, herbalists, wellness coaches, hopefully medical doctors across the board, because it's, again, a lot of peer-reviewed research, but also on my blog. The blog is searchable on NicoleApelian.com. And if you look up an herb or you look up a disorder or something going on, like Crohn's disease, for example, there's articles about that do have references that are, again, research-based. I'm so into it. That's so important, because I don't want just something that's, that's of course the danger, right? Is looking at something that doesn't have the science to back it. So, luckily, most herbal medicine, except for maybe a few things that interact with Western medicines, like St. John's wort has a lot of interactions with Western meds, even though it's a great herb on its own. Most things don't tend to have a lot of interactions with Western medications. So if you have someone that you're doing wellness coaching for, and you're worried about that, you can look that up online nowadays with the pharmacy documents. They actually now have that information available, which is amazing. But most of them integrate quite well. So, I think basically finding a good resource, which again is hard to find. I look on Google Scholar a lot if I'm researching something new, to look at peer-reviewed research, not just looking at what is out there on the internet. But I'm hoping that the book that I'm coming out with in the late fall, that should be kind of a good go-to guide for everybody across the board, and implementing, supplements and which vitamins, et cetera, are good for different issues. So I think finding good resources to answer your question is number one. And I always go to Google Scholar because it's peer-reviewed. And then, secondly, where do giving people the sources, the resource of where to go to get that. You have to make sure you're getting good sources, because if you're giving someone a reishi tincture and it isn't double extracted, or if you don't know that it's actually made with like the fruiting bodies and it's just made with the rice grain, you're not going to have a good source, and that's not going to actually help them. So making sure you have reputable sources for the herbs when you do send somebody there. So, for us in the apothecary, we're really stringent on what we use and how we actually extract our herbs. So making sure that you have a good resource like that, I would say, would be key.
Yeah. Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kim. That's a great question. I love that so much. Right? Because there's so much information out there, as you said, Nicole, and it's like, okay,
right.
you can be overwhelmed by it, but to have sources like with what you're sharing and your blog and the resources is like, okay, because wellness coaches, holistic wellness coaches, at least here at the IAWP, they're really guides for people, right? It's like, you're not going to be an herbalist, you're not going to know everything, but you want to guide people to the right resources and help them to really make the changes and see those transformations. And I think it's just so exciting to hear about all the changes that people have made, with everything that you've shared with people as well. So Let's see, we have time for another question. If anybody else out there has one, now's the time to ask it.
Hi.
Hi.
So, okay, so if somebody, it's not me, but if somebody is struggling with an autoimmune disease, but they don't want to kind of go to the hospital and stuff, and they just want to try things that support them first, like which one of your how would you know which one of your products might help them?
That's a great question. That's a really great question, because a lot of people struggle with autoimmune, and either often they're not believed, which is one thing, right? Or it's really hard sometimes to test for certain things. So, I feel like the do no harm thing is so important, right? So if someone, starts with like a basic thing like an anti-inflammatory diet, that's a great do no harm. An anti-inflammatory diet is super healthy. It's super helpful. It's not going to hurt whomever's on it, right? So that's like such a great place to start. Looking at things like, the mind-body connection, right? Going for walks in nature, spending quality, time away from media, so important. Doing daily gratitudes. Again, do no harm, but it's actually going to do a lot of good. And then as far as, if you're looking at something like a general autoimmune issue, the medicinal mushrooms really are always my go-to, because the reishi, the lion's mane, the turkey tail, the cordyceps, they're the dual extractions, of course. Those are not they're not a harmful thing. They're going to really help anybody who's taking them. And I have to say this, I'm a Ph.D., not an M.D., but I definitely do. So I can't give official medical advice, but I definitely, have do the scientific background and research on everything. And thank goodness there's people researching it. But those are the places I would send them, if I was doing wellness coaching for people, because those across the board are healthy, and they're going to help people deal with a lot of the, things like adrenal fatigue, which is, as we know, like really the HPA axis. They call it adrenal fatigue. It's not a real thing, but the HPA axis, and it also helps calm that. Or an anxiety and stress tincture I have that really helps. And the exception, it has some lemon balm, which isn't good for people that have Hashimoto's and things. But no, the medicinal mushrooms across the board are safe. So the only thing they're vasodilators, a few of them. So if you're going to have surgery, you see you go off them a couple weeks before surgery, and then you can go back on. Now, I always say it's good to talk to your physician about these things, but that is where I would start for people with autoimmune illnesses. And of course, vitamin D levels and omega-3s as well are super important.
And how would like, say somebody isn't, wants kind of to look through your product, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different ones. How would they know which one would be right for them?
All right. So, I sell like bundles. So if you go in, you could get like the Warrior bundle, which is kind of my autoimmune bundle. I try to bundle things for people. Mushroom Trio, which is the reishi, lion's mane, and turkey tail. I don't blend them because I think it's important. People don't dose correctly. So if I blend them all, they'll take like 1 or 2 dropperfuls, and they don't get enough of each. So I do keep them as separate tinctures for dosing, because usually, 2 to 3 dropperfuls of each a day is what most people take for a standard dose. So I try to make sure that they're separated. I do have blends like sleep blends or anxiety blends and things like that. I have an Eastern blend, which is kind of an antiviral blend. And so there are some of those that are blended for people, but the ones that are on their own are dosed separately. People use like stinging nettle for allergies, for example, which just knocks them. So again, a lot of that information is on the website, both my blog and in the Apothecary themselves. If they hit tap more on each of them, it talks about the details about what each of them does. But I think hopefully you'll find that helpful. That's sort of the general autoimmune protocol. And of course, and on my website, I do also have information about general autoimmune illnesses and what to take and also what not to take. Because I feel that a lot of people with autoimmune issues aren't told that there are things that are too immune stimulating for them to take, and that will actually make an autoimmune illness, or could possibly make an autoimmune illness worse. I personally can't use golden seal or echinacea or chaga mushroom, because for me, it's too immunostimulatory. So I stick with the immunomodulatory mushrooms, like the ones I mentioned, because they actually do help with immune regulation, which is so important with any autoimmune illness. Yeah. I hope that answered your question. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
Great.
Thanks, Nicole, so much. So much great wisdom here. And we're coming to the end of our time together. Is there any final words of wisdom? Anything I didn't ask you? Anything you want to share before we officially sign off?
Someone just asked about allergies. They said,
Okay.
stinging nettle. Yes. And daily reishi is good too, but stinging nettle will knock your allergies, and herbisanta will clear you up if you're stuffed up, whoever just asked. So words of wisdom, be happy, live your life to your fullest and give back. That's kind of like what I think, we all have our mission and purpose here on life and in life. And I think finding that is so important. I feel it when you find your purpose is, I think that the community I'm speaking to right now, as you can see all the people on this page, you found your purpose. And it's so wonderful that for people who are doing wellness coaching and helping others. It's a wonderful thing to do. So just, living your life in a really good way and giving back. It's what I always try to instill in my kids and in myself, and, figuring out where you can, fit in this world in a way that will make a positive impact for others, while also still keeping yourself healthy and happy. So yeah,
thank you so much. Thank you so much for that big words of wisdom, and just thanks for sharing with us today, for being here. It was just such an honor to have you. And so thank you.
Of course. Thank you so much. It was a joy to be here, and wow, thanks for the great questions. And it was a really, beautiful interview. You really covered a lot. I'm impressed.
And I'm like, I'm back to, I'll dive into all of my reading now. So to get the rest of the questions answered. But this was so fun. It was just great. And I just want to thank everybody for listening in for this powerful conversation. We'll see you back next time here on Live Well, Dream Big. Thank you, Nicole, so much.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thank you for joining me for today's episode of Live Well, Dream Big. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. And I want to invite you to take your next step toward living well and dreaming big by downloading the Live Well, Dream Big lifestyle book. It's the ultimate guide to becoming your best self and living life on your own terms. You can grab your complimentary copy by going to the link in the show notes or heading directly to iawpwellnesscoach.com/guide. That's iawpwellnesscoach.com/guide.